Hello everyone. In this video I'll be sharing my approach to painting darker skin tones in watercolor. Before I begin painting, I take a moment to study the reference. I'll be paying attention to a few key aspects. The direction of the light and dark areas of the subject, the color temperature. To keep things simple, I divide color temperature into three main types: red leaning, blue leaning, and yellow leaning. And highlights are just as important. I wet the face area with a clean brush as a warm-up, keeping my hand and brush strokes relaxed and flexible before I begin painting. I start with the first base layer in a relatively muted tone, mixed from yellow ochre and Indian red. In the early, overall stages, I prefer using a brush that matches the scale of the subject, one that holds plenty of water and has soft bristles. When I move to the forehead, which is a highlight area, I dilute the paint more. Darker skin tones, while deep in value, often have a strong reflective quality, so I need to be mindful of that to capture it properly. The edge between the forehead and the hairline feels a bit hard, so I use a clean brush to soften and blend the colour upward. The forehead area is still too dark, so I use a clean brush to lift some of the paint. The brush stroke needs to be decisive, pulling the pigment toward the white paper. Keep in mind that you should only lift colour when the paper is still quite damp. If it's too dry, the area will definitely become muddy. The lower area is dry, so I re-wet it. When painting the face, I work from top to bottom, allowing the paint to gradually flow downward. I also tilt my drawing surface slightly, so the paint tends to move down, giving me a bit of help from gravity. I keep a steady rhythm, apply paint, adjust with a clean brush, and repeat. Watercolor needs to be built up in multiple layers to achieve depth and proper values. In the first layer, I'm only placing the light and shadow areas to establish the structure of the face. You should practice keeping your brush strokes simple and relaxed, and avoid overworking the paint. Always remember that watercolor is partly water and partly control. So let the brush move, allow the water to carry the colour, and only use a clean brush to guide it slightly. If certain areas don't feel quite right, it's best to leave them for the next layers. Trying to correct too much at this stage will only make the painting muddy and difficult to adjust. For the next layer, I use a reddish-brown mixed from Indian red and phthalo blue to go deeper into the darker areas. Sometimes I prefer mixing my own colour because it's easier to adjust how warm or cool it is. Using fewer pigments makes it easier to keep the skin tones consistent. What I mean is it just makes things easier, not that you have to mix your own colours. You can of course use a ready-made brown if you prefer. Just be careful with browns. Make sure you choose one with good transparency. You'll notice that for larger areas, I tilt the brush more and use broader strokes. And I avoid going over the same area too many times. When I move into smaller details, I use more of the brush tip, and I can brush over the same area a few more times to build up the value I need. After these first base layers, which mainly establish the light and dark values, the face begins to take shape. And at this point, you begin to feel the subject better, making it easier to bring emotion into the face. For me, this overall stage is very important. In the next stage, I start building colour layers based on the colour temperature I observe from the reference. I use bright reds and blues straight from the paint, without mixing, to apply to the skin areas. I don't mind pushing the colours a bit brighter than the reference. I know that watercolour tends to lose some intensity as it dries. And as more layers with different colour tones are added, the colours naturally become more muted. At the same time, I also want this portrait to feel more eye-catching than the reference. You can see that I use blue in many areas. I love looking for those subtle blue tones in the face and bringing them into the painting. They're not as obvious as the warm colours, but they're essential for making the skin look more believable. I keep pushing the values in the portrait. The colours I'm using aren't something I make up, they're all observed from the reference. For brighter, warmer areas, I use scarlet red. And for the deeper, more muted areas, I add some Indian red. The bright, joyful smile, with the baby's full, glossy lips, is one of the most important areas for conveying emotion in this portrait, so I approach it very carefully. I start by using the brighter colours first, scarlet red for the lips and rose red for the tongue. The darker, cooler colours, like crimson red and blue, are added later. And I pay close attention to preserving the white areas on the lower lip, the edge of the upper lip, the tip of the tongue, and the corners of the mouth. With watercolour, you often need several layers to build up depth and capture subtle details in the darker areas. If you prefer using more pigment, it's better to work in fewer layers. This creates a looser style and is less focused on realism. I increase the value on the shadow side of the face using colours different from those in the initial layers. I use crimson red, sometimes mixed with a bit of phthalo blue. Scarlet red isn't strong enough to push the shadows darker. Indian red is slightly darker, but I use it sparingly because it can easily make the painting look muddy. I've just finished the darkening layer, but the facial forms in the shadow area still aren't fully developed and need more paint. I'll need 1 or 2 more layers in this area. While letting the darkening layer dry, I move on to the light side of the face, refining the midtones and details. I use yellow ochre, yellow deep, and a touch of scarlet red or blue in certain areas. I include yellow deep instead of relying only on yellow. Ochre because I want the skin tones to feel slightly more vibrant than the reference. When I use a clean brush to adjust the paint, you can see the way I move the brush gentle yet decisive. I pull the colour with just a few strokes in the direction I need and avoid brushing back and forth in one area. Always keep your wrist relaxed. This video focuses on facial structure and skin tones. The eye painting process is covered in a separate video on my channel. Now I'm going back to finish the shadow side of the face. I always wait for the paint to dry before adding the next layer. Dark areas can easily become muddy, so I work slowly and stay calm. Many artists prefer a looser approach using fewer layers, simplifying the facial forms and midtones and avoiding the level of detail I'm demonstrating here. In fact, realism isn't watercolor's greatest strength, that belongs more to oil painting. Since this is a commissioned painting, accuracy and likeness are my priorities. This video focuses on learning how to draw and paint accurately, rather than painting expressively or emotionally. I believe that to paint freely and artistically, an artist must first develop a solid understanding of facial structure and fundamental techniques before finding their own style. The baby portrait is basically finished. To recap the process of painting darker skin tones: 1. Lay into base layers with relatively muted values to establish the overall light-dark structure and skin tone. 2. Add brighter colours and begin refining details, paying close attention to the colour temperature of the reference. 3. Strengthen and balance the shadow areas, highlights and midtones. 4. Finish with final details,